It never starts with chaos. It never begins with shouting or speeches. It starts with something quieter, a hum in the air that no one wants to name, a sense that something fundamental has stopped moving. That's what a government shutdown really is. Not just a failure of budgeting, but the soft sound of a society forgetting how to believe in itself. The buildings still stand, the flags still wave, the screens still glow. But beneath all of that, the machinery that turns belief into action grinds to a halt. Each time Washington closes its doors, we tell ourselves it's temporary, a standoff, a tactic, a political maneuver. But inside millions of people, something deeper flickers out. Faith. Faith that problems can still be solved. Faith that the adults in charge still exist. Faith that the country built on compromise still remembers how to compromise. Psychologists have a name for what follows: learned helplessness. It happens when you've tried to change something again and again and nothing works, so you stop trying. At first you protest, then you complain, and then eventually you shrug. That shrug, that moment when hope becomes background noise, is the real sound of decline. Every shutdown is another lesson in helplessness. It teaches citizens that dysfunction is normal, that failure is routine, that government is theater. It tells workers that dedication doesn't matter, tells families that promises are fragile, tells the world that America, the symbol of order, is no longer dependable. And once that message settles into the collective mind, it spreads like humidity. It seeps into classrooms, offices, living rooms. It turns jokes about those politicians into something heavier. Cynicism. Cynicism feels safe because it protects us from disappointment. If we expect nothing, we can't be let down. But cynicism is not wisdom, it's armor. And a country that lives behind armor forgets how to heal. That's what you hear in the quiet after a shutdown. Not outrage, not even fear, just the low hum of a nation emotionally numbed by repetition. In psychology, repetition desensitizes the nervous system. The first shock jolts you, the 10th barely moves you. We've reached our 10th, maybe our 20th. We're so used to watching the system fail that failure no longer surprises us. That's the danger, because surprise is what keeps a democracy awake. When people stop being shocked by brokenness, they adapt to it. They build their lives around it. They plan for failure instead of progress. That's when decline stops being a possibility and becomes a pattern. Look closely at any empire before it fell, and you'll see the same psychological markers: exhaustion, distrust, disbelief in collective purpose. Rome didn't crumble in a single day of fire. It eroded through years of citizens saying, "That's just how things are." That's where America stands now, between awareness and apathy. Every shutdown pushes us an inch closer to apathy. And apathy is the graveyard of republics, because apathy doesn't march in protest. It doesn't vote. It doesn't argue for truth. It watches, mutters, scrolls, and goes to bed. It confuses silence with peace, but silence isn't peace. It's surrender. We like to think we're too advanced, too informed, too free to ever surrender like that. But freedom is not a state. It's a skill. And like any skill, it weakens when it's not practiced. A shutdown is practice for surrender. It normalizes paralysis. It turns gridlock into a national identity. It teaches our children that stalemate is leadership, that outrage is progress, that the only power left is anger. And yet beneath all the anger, beneath the headlines and hashtags, there's still something trying to breathe. Call it conscience, call it the collective heart. Every time we reach a shutdown, that heart beats a little slower, but it hasn't stopped. You can feel it in the way people still show up to work without pay, in the way neighbors still check on each other, in the way Americans, and for all their frustration, still pause, shake their heads and whisper, "We're better than this." That whisper matters, because it means the patient isn't dead yet. It means somewhere beneath the learned helplessness, the democratic muscle memory still twitches. It remembers what it's like to hope. Hope is fragile, yes, but it's also contagious, and so is despair. Right now, both are spreading. Which one wins depends on whether we decide to listen to the silence or to break it. If we listen, the silence becomes normal. If we break it, if we demand better, even when it feels useless, the silence becomes the seed of awakening. That's what every generation before us has had to rediscover. Democracy isn't self-sustaining. It requires belief, and belief requires evidence. When the evidence disappears, people create it again, through action. Maybe that's the strange gift hidden inside the chaos of a shutdown. It reminds us that governance isn't automatic, that freedom isn't background noise, that order doesn't exist until someone insists on it. So when the lights go out in Washington and the headlines scream dysfunction, listen closer. Underneath that chaos, something else is whispering, wake up. Because no matter how many times this government shuts down, the people who refuse to shut down, emotionally, morally, civically, are the ones who keep it alive. The shutdown is the symptom, and our resignation is the disease. And the cure, the only cure, is remembering that the silence isn't the end. It's the call to reopen not just a building or an agency, but the part of us that still believes we are capable of better. No kings, no saviors, no easy answers, just citizens, tired, flawed, frustrated, but still standing in the quiet, deciding that belief is worth rebuilding. Every shutdown starts long before the vote. Long before the cameras, the statements, the finger-pointing. It begins in something far quieter and far older than politics. It begins in fear. Fear is the true currency of power. You don't need to print it. You don't need to mine it. You just need to create it. Because once you make people afraid, they'll follow anyone who promises safety. That's the simplest equation in human psychology, and it's the one that's driving our democracy to the brink. The fear machine. Fear works because the brain is built to prioritize survival over truth. The amygdala, a small almond-shaped cluster deep inside the brain, doesn't care about nuance or evidence. It cares about threat, and when that alarm sounds, the rational mind, the prefrontal cortex, starts to dim. It's like a blackout during a storm. The lights of logic flicker, and emotion rushes in. In that moment, we don't reason. We react. We stop thinking like citizens and start acting like prey. Politicians have learned to weaponize that response. They don't need to solve problems anymore. They just need to keep us afraid of something or someone. And they have. One side says, they're taking your country. The other says, they're taking your rights. Both sides whisper, they're coming for you. Different words, same wiring. The brain doesn't distinguish between physical threat and ideological threat. And to the nervous system, danger is danger. So when we hear that the other side is destroying America, we react the same way our ancestors did to a predator's growl. We tense up. We get defensive. We prepare to fight. That's not politics. That's neurology. And when an entire country is trapped in that fight-or-flight state, reason dies. You can't think clearly when your body believes it's under attack. You can't compromise when your tribe feels cornered. You can't govern when fear becomes the national anthem. The profit of panic. Fear isn't just a political weapon, it's a business model. Every headline, every broadcast, every social post is engineered for engagement, and engagement is driven by anxiety. Breaking news, crisis alert. Chaos in Washington. The language is surgical. Every phrase is designed to spike adrenaline, to keep you watching, scrolling, reacting. The media doesn't need to tell you the truth. It just needs to keep you hooked. Psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism casinos use to keep gamblers at the table. You never know which spin will win, which post will enrage you, which clip will confirm your beliefs. So you keep coming back again and again and again. The system doesn't care whether you're informed. It only cares that you're addicted. And fear is the most addictive drug of all. It doesn't matter if you lean left or right. Fear feels the same in every body. The shaking hands, the tight chest, the need to act, or at least to shout. We think we're engaged, but really we're being conditioned. Conditioned to distrust. Conditioned to divide. Conditioned to keep feeding the outrage machine that tells us we're awake, when in reality, we're asleep with our eyes open. That's why every shutdown feels like déjà vu. It's not new, it's ritual. The ritual of the fear economy. The psychology of power. There's a secret that people in power rarely admit. Control isn't about convincing people. It's about framing reality. You don't have to solve the problem, you just have to define it. You don't have to be right, you just have to sound certain. Because certainty in an age of fear feels like safety. That's how demagogues are born. They don't promise truth, they promise clarity. They make the world simple again. Us and them, good and evil, saviors and traitors. They prey on what psychologists call cognitive closure, the desperate need for a clear, simple answer when everything feels chaotic. It's not that people are stupid, it's that the human mind hates uncertainty. We will trade freedom for order if we think it will stop the panic. And fear is the salesman who makes that trade look righteous. That's why so many people now follow leaders who break rules, insult critics, or bypass systems. It's not that they've forgotten democracy. It's that psychologically they've mistaken dominance for competence. That's called authoritarian conditioning, when fear rewires the brain to equate control with safety. You can see it in families, in corporations, and now in nations. The more afraid people become, the more they crave someone who says, "Don't worry, I'll handle it." But power handed over in fear never comes back willingly. That's the lesson history keeps teaching, and the one we keep forgetting. The crowd and the comfort. Fear is contagious. You can catch it the same way you catch a cold, through proximity, through exposure, through repetition. That's why fear spreads faster in groups. Crowds amplify emotion. One person's panic becomes another's confirmation. One chant becomes a movement. And soon, what began as anxiety becomes identity. That's what psychologists call collective hysteria. When a shared threat creates shared behavior, even if the threat isn't real, the brain prefers belonging over accuracy. It's easier to be wrong together than right alone. That's how fear hardens into culture. You see it in the rallies that promise salvation. You see it in the online mobs that hunt for heretics. You see it in citizens who stop seeing each other as neighbors and start seeing each other as enemies. And once fear becomes identity, logic has no power over it. Facts don't fix fear. Connection does. But connection requires courage. The courage to listen, to doubt, to stay open when everything in you wants to close. That courage is rare. And in a culture that rewards outrage, it feels almost extinct. The shutdown of empathy. Every shutdown is built on fear, but the real damage is what comes after. Empathy fatigue. When fear dominates long enough, empathy shuts down. The brain becomes too tired to care. You stop seeing the humanity in others because your nervous system is too busy defending itself. That's why politics feels crueler now. It's not just policy, it's psychology. The emotional bandwidth of the nation is maxed out. People don't have energy left to understand each other. They're too busy surviving the next headline. And when empathy shuts down, everything that makes democracy human starts to wither. Conversation turns to combat. Leadership turns to manipulation. Citizens turn into tribes. And once you divide a nation into tribes, you no longer have a republic. You have a psychological battlefield. Fear's final trick. Fear has one final devastating effect. It makes chaos feel normal. After enough cycles of panic and paralysis, people start mistaking dysfunction for democracy. They say, "This is just how it is." They stop demanding more because they don't believe more exists. That's fear's masterpiece. Not making you run, but making you sit still. Convincing you that change is impossible, that the machine is too big, that the next shutdown, the next scandal, the next outrage is inevitable. But fear only wins when awareness falls asleep. The moment we name it, we weaken it. The moment we understand it, we interrupt it. That's why this moment, this shutdown, matters. Because it's not just a test of policy, it's a test of psychology, to see whether fear still rules this nation's mind, or whether we finally remember that courage was always our true currency. Trust. It's not a law. It's not a policy. It's the quiet contract holding every society together, invisible, unspoken, and essential. Without trust, money is just paper. Laws are just words. And democracy is just theater. Every government shutdown is a symptom of one illness, the collapse of trust. Trust between leaders and citizens. Trust between citizens and institutions. Trust between one another. Once that breaks, nothing else works. You can restart the government, reopen the offices, and cut the checks. But if people don't believe anymore, the system stays broken even after it starts running again. The fractured mind of a nation. In psychology, trust is the bridge between uncertainty and hope. It's what allows the human mind to function without constant fear. When trust erodes, anxiety fills the gap. Now, zoom out. Think of a nation as a collective mind. When trust collapses at scale, the symptoms look familiar. Paranoia, projection, dissociation, emotional exhaustion. You can see them all around us. We don't just distrust politicians. We distrust neighbors, media, scientists, teachers, even the idea of truth itself. The collapse of trust isn't just political, it's neurological. We live in a constant state of threat detection. Every headline feels like a warning. Every policy feels like betrayal. And the government shutdown is just the physical manifestation of what's been happening in our psyche for decades. A nervous system in permanent crisis mode. When the body feels unsafe, it shuts down non-essential functions to conserve energy. That's exactly what our government keeps doing, mirroring our collective psychology. It shuts down because it doesn't trust itself to move forward. Institutional betrayal. There's a term psychologists use called institutional betrayal. It describes what happens when the systems meant to protect you become the source of your pain. When citizens believe that the government no longer acts in their interest, the emotional response is identical to that of a person betrayed by someone they love. Confusion, disillusionment, grief, and finally, anger. You can feel that grief vibrating across the country. People have lost not just faith in government, but faith in goodness, in the idea that anyone with power could still act with integrity. It's why cynicism feels patriotic now. It's why sarcasm replaced optimism. But beneath that cynicism lies heartbreak, because betrayal always hurts most when it comes from the people you once believed in. Citizens who pay taxes, who vote, who serve, who sacrifice. They believed in something sacred, that in the end, this system would hold. That somewhere, behind all the noise, there were still adults in the room. That behind all the partisanship, there was still a shared conscience. And every time the government shuts down, that belief erodes. The message is clear. You can do everything right and still be let down by the people you depend on. That's the kind of trauma that doesn't heal easily. Because collective betrayal becomes collective trauma, and trauma changes behavior. Traumatized people stop expecting safety. Traumatized citizens stop expecting stability. And when stability feels impossible, they start seeking control, even if it means giving it away. That's the psychology behind the rise of the strongman. When trust dies, control becomes seductive. And when control feels safer than freedom, democracy itself is on borrowed time. From public service to public spectacle. Once upon a time, government was a calling. Public service meant something. It was imperfect, but it carried a sense of duty, of responsibility. Now, it feels like a stage. Every hearing is a show, every debate is a performance, and every vote is a photo op. Citizens aren't watching governance. They're watching a psychological play, a morality drama where everyone wants to be the hero. No one admits they're the villain, and the script keeps changing. This shift from service to spectacle is the final symptom of broken trust. Because once people believe the system is fake, the only thing that matters is attention, and attention is the cheapest form of power. In this new ecosystem, outrage replaces substance. Leaders stop solving problems and start auditioning for applause. The goal is no longer function, it's virality. But what happens when government becomes entertainment? People stop expecting results. They start measuring leadership in sound bites and memes. They stop demanding competence and start rewarding charisma. That's how trust collapses. Not through one scandal, but through years of emotional conditioning. We stop expecting integrity and we start expecting theater, and eventually we can't tell the difference. The ripple effect. The loss of trust doesn't stay in Washington. It travels. It leaks into every corner of American life. You see it when parents stop trusting teachers, when citizens stop trusting journalists, when communities stop trusting law enforcement, when patients stop trusting doctors. Every institution that relies on cooperation begins to crumble under suspicion. And the irony is this: the more trust breaks down, the more control people demand. The more control they demand, the more freedom they lose. And the more freedom they lose, the more fear they feel. It's a self-reinforcing cycle, the psychology of collapse. When a system stops believing in itself, it doesn't need an enemy to destroy it. It implodes from within. A nation of strangers. There's a loneliness running through this country now. It's not just isolation, it's emotional distance. We don't recognize each other anymore. Politics has become the new religion and distrust has become its doctrine. People no longer say, "I disagree with you." They say, "You're evil." That's dehumanization, the psychological process that makes cruelty possible. Once you stop seeing someone as human, you can justify anything against them. And when that logic enters a democracy, the consequences are devastating. A government shutdown is just a symptom of that mindset, the ultimate expression of us versus them. It's the system saying out loud what the people have been feeling in silence. We don't trust each other enough to keep the lights on. That's not politics, that's psychology, a nervous breakdown disguised as governance. The path to repair. So how do you rebuild trust once it's broken? Psychologists know that trust doesn't return through words. It returns through consistency, through actions that align with promises, through vulnerability that admits we failed you. Imagine if a leader said that today, honestly, without spin. Imagine the power of hearing, we know we've lost your trust, and we're here to earn it back. That's how you begin to heal collective trauma. Acknowledgement, because trust is not built through speeches. It's built through repair. It starts small, a worker paid on time, a policy delivered honestly, a promise kept quietly. Those are the acts that slowly rewire the national nervous system. But that repair won't come from politicians alone. It has to start with us. We have to stop treating mistrust as wisdom. We have to stop rewarding division with attention. We have to remember that trust isn't naive. It's necessary. The heartbeat beneath the noise. For all the noise, for all the anger, there is still something sacred beating beneath the surface. The belief, fragile but alive, that we are still capable of decency, that this country, even at its worst, can still surprise itself with courage. Every time we choose understanding over contempt, we repair one cell in the national body. Every time we choose patience over panic, we strengthen the heart that still beats for democracy. That's how we start to heal the psychological wound that no shutdown can hide, by daring to trust again, not blindly, but bravely. Because courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to move forward even when fear is loudest. And trust, real, human trust, is courage made visible. No kings and no crowns, just people trying again.